Good morning. I thought I hit the live button and I didn't. Oh well. Okay, so good morning. And if you're just joining in, please make sure that you put a comment in the comment section. And by all means, mention where you're from. I love seeing where you're from. Everybody else loves seeing where you're from. It's fun for me to see people from all over the place joining me. So, let me tell you what I'm going to do today. So today I have a little China, it's a little China horse that was actually belonged to my grandmother. So I'm going to paint this today, and I want to make this look like it's actually made of China, so, or porcelain, or whatever the case may be. So I want it to look like that rather than just a really bad attempt at painting a realistic horse. So, so that's what I'm going to do. I am going to be working. Let me switch over to my demonstration here. Let me see. Okay, so got to close something here. Okay, so I'm just getting rolling here. I know that there's a little delay, so by all means, put a comment in there and mention where you're from. So I am going to switch over now to my demo mode. Let me see. There we go. Okay, so thank you for joining. And if you aren't aware, every Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock in the morning, Eastern time that is, I've been presenting a little watercolor demonstration. And I've been doing that for quite a while now. I've probably about a year, and I started out on Facebook Live. I eventually switched over to YouTube because I was having some issues, technical issues with the live stream on Facebook, but hopefully if you're from Facebook, you're joining me here, and thank you. One of the easiest ways, by the way, to get notifications that I actually am live is to subscribe to the channel. So somewhere down there below my finger is a subscribe button, and that will help you. I know I've had a couple of people say that they can't find me, so hopefully that gets you here. That little bell notification will let you know if I am live, and so welcome. And so this is my reference. This is my little porcelain horse. Now, if I set this up for me to paint, you won't see what I'm painting. So I am painting from the photo so that we both see the same angle. And so that's what I've done. Now, with let me see here. There we go. Okay, well, we do have a couple people here. I was wondering if anybody was joining me here. Make sure you put something in the comments if you can. If you cannot see the comments, after this live stream, by all means, you can put something in the comments section below the video. And if you would like to see something in the future, by all means, just mention, you know, Shelley, I'd like to see, you know, painting a waterfall, or painting, you know, I don't know, whatever the case may be, Northern Lights or anything. So give me your ideas. I always love seeing that. Good morning, Melody. Yes, it's a beautiful day here too, and so I'm just waiting for a couple people to hop on board, and we'll get rolling. But first thing I'm doing here is I'll tell you about my materials first of all. So I'm going to be working on arches, 140-pound cold pressed paper. I have pre-stretched it. That is that I soaked the paper in room temperature water for about 3 minutes. Then I stapled it down nice and wet, let it dry fully, and then I've just taped off over the tape, over the staples. Okay, so I will be using DaVinci watercolors for the most part. I do have a few of the Winsor Newton in here, a few Daniel Smith, I think. And so I will have an assortment, but I think most of my palette right now is DaVinci watercolor. My brushes, I'm going to be using a couple of different brushes here. I will use, I'm mainly using some squirrel hair brushes, but these are brushes that I like to use. Squirrel hair brushes have a tendency to hold a lot of paint, a lot of water, but they have a beautiful point. So you can see this one looks a little bit fuzzy, but as soon as I get it wet, it will come to a beautiful point. So I can use these brushes, and that will give me a lot of control. Good morning, Diana and Dorothy and Evelyn and Anne. Thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. I know you guys are kind of regulars that join me every week, and thank you so much. I hope you're aware that I also have full-length demonstrations on my website. You can find my websites right below at the bottom here, right here where my hand is. And you can check out the Zoom workshops that I have there. I teach those every Friday. So with those, I will mention that I have, they're generally about 3 hours in length. So I go into a lot more detail. You get all progress pictures that I take. You get full list of materials. You get a line drawing reference picture. You get lifetime access to the recording. So those are all benefits of the full-length Zoom workshops that go into a lot more detail than I do on my Wednesdays. So I hope you'll join me for one of those one day, and we'll get going here. So I'm going to start off by examining my reference here. And the first thing I notice is that, boy, there's a lot of really bright highlights. They are super crisp. And that is one of the telltale signs of something that is got a shiny surface. So you'll see that with glass. You'll see that with anything metallic, chrome and silver and brass and things like that. But you'll also find that on a glossy surface such as china. So this is very important for creating the correct look. All right, so the way that I can paint all this dark, I could paint around it, but that's a little bit of a nuisance. So I'm going to use a little bit of masking fluid. So my masking fluid is actually white, the one that I purchased to buy. It is, this one's called Dainayw Artist Series. It's a Canadian brand, but Winsor Newton makes great masking fluid. Like, there's a lot of great brands out there, but the important thing is make sure that your masking fluid is really fresh. All right, so I don't know if you can hear this, but it is quite fluid. And if it's gummy or thick and you can hardly get the lid off because it's all gummed up, then the masking fluid is not very good to use. Buy a smaller size bottle. It's just not worth buying the big one unless you're using it a lot because it has a short shelf life. So what I do though is I pour this into a smaller container. This is just a recycled little jam container that you get, you know, kind of at a restaurant or a hotel or something. And I have added a few drops of cobalt blue to this and stirred it up really well. So the reason I do that is because if my masking fluid is white and my paper is white, it's really hard for me to be accurate about what I'm painting on with masking fluid. And accuracy with your masking fluid is an important thing to keep in mind. So I'm going to be using a small round brush, and I'm going to dampen the bristles, soap up the brush. This is just brush cleaning soap, but any soap will do. You can use a bar of soap or liquid soap or anything like that. And I can get this all soaked up all the way up to the ferrule part of my brush. And what this does is it acts like barrier cream. Okay, so a mechanic will use barrier cream on their hands to keep the oil from penetrating their hands. That way, at the end of the day, when they're all greasy and everything, they can get their hands clean. Otherwise, they have these stains on there. Masking fluid is like gum in your hair without the soap. So it's very important to put something in your brush to protect the bristles. So what I want to do here is I want to save all these whites, and the masking fluid will act like a resist. So it'll keep the paint from penetrating the paper in any place that I put it. So I'm going to dip into this, and make sure you stir this so that you don't have bubbles, because the bubbles can pop. Then you have little pinholes in anything that you paint. So make sure you're stirring it while not giving it a tremendous shake. It's very important. So what I'll do is I'm going to come in and start marking where all of these highlights are going to be. And these are small areas, so I don't need to put this on really thick. If I were doing a larger area, I would be putting this on a little bit thicker, but because they're small areas, I'm just using a little bit in my brush, and that will help it dry faster too, so that I can continue on, right? All right, so I'm just going to pick out all these little highlights, which I did mark in my drawing. Now, there's a lot of things in the drawing I didn't mark down though, and I want to talk about, how much drawing do you need to do with your painting? My suggestion would be to pick out the key things, only the key things, leave the rest for the paintbrush to do, okay? Don't do everything with a pencil. What happens when you work with a pencil and you do a lot of lines and you end up with so much detail that you tend to tighten up with your brush when it comes time to painting it. So I'm putting in a few of the highlights here because they're so important. But what I will do after that is I am going to do most of it just as I'm painting things. Some of the things will be wet into wet. One thing that the masking fluid is going to give me is crisp lines, which I actually want in this case. So there's like a whole lot of detail on the face, like there's the nostrils and the star on the face and that sort of thing. And I'm really just concerned about the highlights. The rest I can do with the brush. All right. So as long as I'm not putting this masking fluid on too thick, this will dry in very short time. What I can do while that is drying is I can focus maybe on the shadow that's on the ground, so I can, it's not like I have to sit and wait for paint to dry or masking fluid to dry. A couple of things I didn't mark in. Now, just before I do go on, these highlights, the placement of them are in, like, the place you put them is important, because mostly the highlights will be caught on the peaks or the high points of your object. So they also help to describe form. So here, the neck bumps out a little bit. So you get a little bit of a highlight there where it bumps out. And a couple I didn't draw on, so I'm just going to mark them on with my brush. I want to make sure I put them on and have enough, because I really like all the sparkle that's on this horse. Okay, I think I just about have what I need. There we go. All right, so I'm going to rinse that out of my brush. You want to get the masking fluid out of your brush right away, so it doesn't harden in there. But just here's a pro tip, is that if it does, like if you forget for some reason to take the masking fluid out of your brush, you might think your brush is wrecked. But I found a solution to this, and it is a product called Goo Gone. And you can find this in a hardware store. I don't know if you can get it at the dollar store, but I know that you can get it at the hardware store. Goo Gone is designed for taking the gummy part of labels off. Now, the gummy part of labels has latex in it, as does the masking fluid. So if you use the Goo Gone and pour a little into a cup and really get your bristles into the cup and get the Goo Gone all the way in there and let that start dissolving that masking fluid, you can get that brush back to new. And I seriously mean new. Like I was actually very shocked that I could get my brush back. Real bonus that I was able to do that, because I thought I had ruined a brush. And then I ruined another brush just to see if it was a fluke, and it wasn't. So it really will take it out. It's called Goo Gone, Googone. Goo Gone. Great little product. So, masking brush away. I'm going to get now into my squirrel hair brushes. I have put the names of the brands of the brushes that I am using in the description below, so you can look that up afterwards if you like. But these brushes really weren't that expensive. I thought that they were pretty good value. So this one is a number 10. Now, when you see brush sizes and you see, like a brush that says a 10, sometimes you get a brush in another brand and it's a whole other size. You hold the two side by side and you've got one set of bristles that's huge and then another one that's small. It's kind of like clothes are like that. You get one brand of clothes and a size 8 is huge and another one it's really small. So keep that in mind. Take it with a grain of salt that sometimes your brushes are going to be different sizes. But I want to look at this shadow. All right, this shadow has areas where it's got a little bit of a crisp edge, but then the further away from the horse, where it makes contact with the tabletop, and I took that on this table, which was a white table, and where it makes contact, it has the crisp shadow. As it gets further away, like this shadow back here is a lot softer than it is right up here close to the foot. All right, so that's how you can tell where the object is actually making contact with the table. If I did all of this shadow, this is important, all right? So if I made all of this shadow very soft, the effect that would give is that this horse was levitating and not actually making contact with the table. So this is an important thing to think about when you are doing your shadows. Should it be a crisp edge or should it be a soft edge? In this case, it's a little bit of a transition. So what I will do is I am going to only dampen the paper a little bit near the horse. Okay, so I blot my brush, it's clean water, and I will dampen it there. And I'm getting a big area damp. And then as I get further away, I can get a little wetter, get the paper a little bit wetter. Then when I put the color down, where it's only damp, it's only going to spread a little. Where it's really wet, it'll spread more. So that's going to give me that transition. So that's going to help. All right, so I don't know if everybody was here when I began the live feed, but I did suggest to you that if you have ideas for my live demonstrations, I would love to hear them. So you can put it in the chat section, or if you're watching the replay, then you can place it in the comment section below. In any case, I will see what your ideas are. I've got a whole list that I kind of put together myself, but I'd like to hear your ideas. So I'm going to continue with this wetting. I don't want to do too much talking and forget about the paper drying as I'm going along. So all right, nice and wet over here. But then not as wet as I get closer to the foot, the hoof. Okay, but I'm not staying in the lines because I don't want it so crisp that I can't make a transition. I don't want to go from dry paper to wet paper. I just want to go from drier paper to wetter paper. All right, so I'm going to take my brush and just thirsty brush, and I'm just going to pick up any of the extra moisture in some of those areas. So let me demonstrate here by holding this in the light what I mean by damp versus wet. All right, so if I hold this up to the light, you can see that it's quite wet here, and that it's only like not much shine here close to the foot at all. You can see it's drier. Not completely dry, but you can see that it's drier, so it's much wetter here. So when I put my color down, it should spread more here where it's wetter than it does right by the hoof. So for this shadow, I'm just going to use neutral tint. Neutral tint is a really nice transparent dark. All right, so I'm going to start with a blotted brush. Let me zoom out a little bit so you can see what I'm doing with my brush on my paper towel, because I think that's important to see. All right, so on my paper towel, I am blotting, and I am going to start right here. I do have to be careful where I hit the leg here, but as I come up to the leg, and then I start getting into the area that's more wet, you can see that it's now transitioning from a little bit of paint bleeding to a lot more. It bleeds a little, and I'm blotting my brush because if I go in with really wet paint, even if it's only damp, if my brush is really wet, it's going to spread a lot. So keeping that brush control is kind of everything in watercolor. So this is going to come up, and there's kind of a lighter area in here. And as I hit the area that's wetter, things get a little bit more soft on the edges. By the time I get this shadow on, that masking should be dry enough that I can come back to that and start painting the porcelain horse. Okay, so this foot here, it's got a crisp edge right there, but then I start getting out into the area where it spreads, where it's a little wetter on my paper, and things will spread a little bit more. So what do you do if it doesn't spread the way you want it to? What then? Well, you can help it. You can help it along. So I'm just going to put some on here and show you what I mean by that. Okay, so if you need to help your paint move along, mine spread pretty well, so I'm okay with it. But what I can do is just rinse off my brush and blot it quite well, and just kind of tickle the edges, and I'll be able to get that to move out a little bit more. Don't go in with a wet brush, because that's really important. If you go in with a wet brush, you will push back at the paint. It will create a blossom. All right, so the brush must be drier than the paper. So I can make that pull out, but I'm trying not to because I actually am fairly happy with what I've got. So I'm going to leave that to simply dry the way it is. Okay, so I have my shadow, but I need the horse now. So for my horse, I am going to be looking at, okay, what colors are in here. I will start with my lighter colors and then I will work to my darks, start building up, applying color wet into wet. All right, so wet into wet means that my edges will be soft. If I work wet on dry, I will get harder edges. So as I paint this horse in, and I can paint it in basically this color here, then I can start coming in with darker color on top, probably the neutral tint again, and I'll be able to add my darks in while things are wet. Some of the areas are not brown, obviously, you know, the markings on the socks on his front feet, and of course the blaze on the front, and there looks like there's a little bit on the chest as well. But there is another section here where there's a bit of shine. Do you see that on the underbody? That is reflected light, and because it's a glossy surface, this also has crisp edges, but it's not as bright as the masking fluid we did previously, where we're trying to keep the white of the paper. So I'm going to start off with my lights, then I'll come in with, and I will put in some of my darks, but I won't put everything in because I have some work to do here. I will start with, I think I'm going to start with raw sienna. So I'm going to use some raw sienna. I will also use a little bit of burnt sienna because burnt sienna is a little more reddish and I can get a little bit more of those chocolatey warm tones. I'm going to go with a brush that's really filled up. I might even go to a bigger brush. Let me grab, I'm going to grab this brush here because it'll hold more paint, and if it holds more, I can go longer. I can cover more ground and I can work a little faster. I don't have to keep coming back, dipping into my paint and so on. But I want to make sure I have enough mixed up. So, got to get my puddle big enough. All right, so with big, confident, bold application of paint, I'm going to come in here using the point of my brush to stay in my lines. Dripped a bit here, so I'll just blot that. And it may feel like, oh gosh, you know, some of this is going to be dark, but you always have to remember with watercolor that things are going to dry about 20% lighter, so it'll be a surprise. If you have some china teacups and things like that, that makes a great subject as well for this type of thing. All right, so because I'm working on dry, I can actually work around things like that blaze on the face. I think it's called a blaze. I'm not a horse person, so I'm not really sure, but I think it's called a blaze. If you know the answer, just put it in the comments, then I'll know. All right, so I'm going to come right down the side. I'm going to just paint around where this blaze is. And by the way, if you have a friend that you think might be interested in these demonstrations, by all means, please do share. It really helps when I have enough people here to make my being here worthwhile, right? So by all means, please do share. I think there's a share button. Okay, so I am looking at my reference here. Let's get this into view, and it looks kind of yellow, doesn't it? But I haven't put the reddish tones in there yet, and I haven't put the darks in there yet. But what I am doing is I'm going to work around some of the highlights that I see in the reflected light. And the reason I'm working around them is because those highlights are not golden. They're more bluish. They're more of a bluish gray in here. They don't have a lot of this golden tone in it. So those I'm going to work around. And let's see, this leg. Okay, so I think I can stop right there. And that, there's no areas that I have to connect. Yes, there is. I spoke too soon. I just spotted that I have to come down this leg. So I'm going to come around that highlight that I'm seeing on this leg. There's other highlights on the legs, so I'm going to leave some of those areas just white paper. And I know that, yeah, it's not going to be all white. I will come in with a bit of color on those, but I'm going to leave them white for now. Okay, and I have to remember that this horse has these white socks, so I'm not going to come down all the way. Just like under here, I will come in with this. This is all going to be dark, so I can put this right underneath what I've got here. Thing I like about these squirrel brushes and the nice point to them is I can work around highlights with the nice point that they come to. So these are the shapes I'm looking at, like right here under the underbelly. There's a gap at the front of the leg here. There's a little gap where it wouldn't have that color. So I'm painting around that. And then I can pretty much come down the leg, I think, at this point, because I do have the masking on there to keep me in line. Now, working down the leg like this, you do want to make sure your background is dry so that you don't have one paint running into another. So you do have to let things dry. And I pretty much have my golds on there. Now, I had originally said that I would work wet into wet in order to get these darks happening. I thought maybe I could do it in one go, but I'm going to have to allow this to dry. So I can grab, actually I can grab a dryer and speed this up. So I will do that. 1 second. Okay, so I have a dryer here. It has a cool button. So this cool button is the one I want to use, because if I use heat and I've got masking fluid on there, I can actually bake it onto my paper. So if you are blow drying something to speed up drying time, but you have masking fluid on there, either have a cool setting on your dryer. If you don't have that, make sure you're holding your dryer well away from your paper. Like we're talking 12 inches minimum. All right, so hold it away from your paper and keep the dryer moving. All right, so keep it in motion. Don't allow that masking fluid to heat up. I actually got impatient last week, and when I went to try to take off my masking fluid, guess what happened? It pulled the paper off, the entire paper. So do not get impatient with this. You do have to wait for things to dry, or use a cool setting, just natural air. So that's what I'll be using. I have a dryer with this. I'm going to mute while I do it so that you don't have to listen to the racket. So just give me a second. Okay, so I have it dry now, and when I place my hand on it, it should feel about the same temperature as the back of your hand. I like to use the back of my hand rather than my fingers, because my fingers have more oils. Back of your hand, the temperatures should be about the same as the paper. You can also tell if your paper is dry because it goes flat. If you can sort of bounce your paper, and it's got kind of a bubble where it's raised up, it's not dry yet. It might be dry just on the surface, but the underneath layers aren't dry yet. And you could risk taking the layers off. Oh, that's fantastic, Anne. Thank you so much. All right, so I'm going to take some clean water, and I'm going to re-wet an area that I want to work in. So I'm going to just take this top portion here, and I'm going to re-wet it. And by re-wetting it, drying it has set the paper so that it won't move the paint that I just put down. And it's now not going to move much unless I play with it too much. So I'll be careful not to do that. You don't want to overbrush this and get a lot of problems happening. So I'm just going to work in here, and now I'll go back to that neutral tint. That's the color that I used for my shadow. And if I put neutral tint, oh, actually, no, I'm not going to use neutral tint yet. What I want to do is I want to get some burnt sienna in there because that's a little more reddish. I want to warm this up a bit. So I'll do that. I'm going to work my way to dark. So I will get to my neutral tint eventually, but I'm going to start with burnt sienna. Okay, so you can see how reddish that is. It's really going to start sort of warming things up. And I can put the shadows in, and they will have a softer effect because I wet the paper. So that's going to allow things to mix and blend. Even though that first layer dried on me, yeah, I just re-wet it again. So I'll just come in here. Whoop, got a blob in there. Bit of undissolved color. There we go. Okay, so I'm leaving the spots that need to stay light. And I can start to get a little bit more specific, I guess, about where this needs to go. I want you to notice that I am blotting my brush because I don't want to apply so much color that it's going to spread and fill up that wet area. But the timing's really important here, because if you hit it too far into the dry time, you know, if it begins to dry and you haven't had a chance to put all of this down and you keep pushing and pushing and go working past that window of time that you can actually work, then you could run into issues. So I'm going to just get in here with a few more bits, and then I will have to stop again because I won't be able to continue working. I'm looking very closely now at my reference. Let's bring this down actually. I'm looking at like the muscles and things like that in the cheek and in the face. And so that's where I'm taking extra care to create the right areas of light and dark. All right, I really want to be focusing on these shadows. So if I start working in and oh my gosh, what's happened, you know, the paper's too dry and I'm getting a hard line and things aren't doing what I want them to do. First of all, that's the time to stop trying to add more paint and focus on softening anything that that may have a hard edge. You don't want it to dry that way. So I'm blotting my brush really well, and I'm going to tickle any of those crisp edges that I don't want. All right, so if I've got any crisp edges, I will come in and soften those. So I'm going to come in along the side of the horse here. I've got another kind of muscle thing here. Couple of little lighter highlights, which I'm painting around because I don't want them a warm color. I want them a cooler color, so something leaning a little bit more to a gray, a little bit more gray in the highlights. The reason that they're kind of gray is because they're reflecting the table, which is a bright white. White typically has coolness to it. I say typically because there is also warm white, but all right, so I could have a little bit of a softer transition here. I've got a couple of hard lines, so I'm going to rinse and blot my brush and tickle, just tickle those edges before the paint sets up, and then I can continue to work. All right, so I will just go through and systematically add in all of this reddish tone to my horse's tail and the rest of it. going to leave a little area underneath that tail. There's a little reflected light on the bottom. So I'm going to leave a little bit there. Adding in just maybe a little bit more in a couple places. Knowing that this is all going to dry a little bit lighter. If by chance I miss the mark, you know, and I paint something and it's like, ah, darn, I wanted to make that a little bit, I wanted to leave that white, but I accidentally hit it, or I mistakenly painted over something. There are things you can do. You can lighten things up. Oh, hi, Terry. Hi, Verna. Oh, Jan, yeah. Oh, the same horse. Yeah, I guess, you know, let's see what make this is. This is Beswick in England. So I think this Beswick and Royal Doulton and all of those things, you know, they're all kind of our grandma's era. And, or if you're younger, it's be your great grandma's era, I suppose. But, it was quite the thing to collect these. And so now I'm just coming in and I'm looking at where the darks are on this back leg. And occasionally I'm seeing lighter or darker versions of this. So where I see a lighter version, I will dilute the color a little bit more. Where I see it a little darker, I'll pick up a little bit more pigment and maybe have my brush a little drier. So, so I can control whether it goes light or dark just by how wet or dry my brush is or how diluted the color is. So I'm going to come in fairly dark on this. And then right before the hoof, it gets a little bit lighter again. So that's where I'm going to rinse my brush and just keep going with a rinsed brush. So that will make that edge nice and soft. And lighter. Okay, so I want to get a little bit more softness in a few of these areas. Okay. Little bits here and there of this warm, but not too much. A lot of that is cool. So I'm going to just get this last leg done, the hind leg. I'm going to work around any of the highlights again. So there's a few little highlights in there. I'm going to work around them. If you have trouble working around these things and it's like, oh, I can't work that way. I can't work around stuff. This is negative painting, by the way. You know, I'm not very good at negative painting and I'm finding it really hard. You could also mask these areas, then remove that masking and then put the darks in. I like to do it as I go along because sometimes I want to soften an edge. If you're using masking, it's really hard to soften the edges. So I did say that there's a lot of shiny hard edges in China, but there are, of course, exceptions to everything, and there will be some areas that will be softer. So, so that's why I like to paint it on rather than mask everything. Really just mask the highlights. Now I'm working around stuff. All right, so I can just do that hoof because I know that the hoof will be darker and I can come in with that. All right, so that's coming along. Let's give this another quick dry and we'll continue on. We'll move on to our darks, okay? So 1 second. Don't forget you want to use the cool setting, and I will put myself on mute again so that you don't have to listen to it. my noisy dryer. Meanwhile, while I'm drying, I'd love to see your suggestions. All right, be right back. Okay, so I am back. Oh, good morning, Margot. Hi, Verna. All right, so now I want to start introducing. So I'm gonna start shifting not only from lighter to darker, but I'm going to start incorporating cool colors. All right, so if you're confused about cool colors, take a look at a color wheel. In the where you see the yellows and reds, that whole half of the color wheel is in the warm tones. And where you see the blues, greens, the bluish purples, that sort of thing, anything sort of in that zone is your cool side. So basically the color wheel can tell you, is an orange a warm or a cool, and things like that. So it can tell you those. But then you have the issue of, okay, well, is a brown a cool brown or a warm brown? All that means is like even a cool blue, for example, there can be a warm blue and a cool blue. And now what that means is that the color trends towards a warm red, or it trends towards a green, which would be cooler, or trends towards a purple, which would be warmer. So when you're talking about a cool color like a blue, and then we're talking warm, what the heck is a warm blue? If blue's cool, right? So if you're talking about whether or not a color is warm or cool, it's where it tends towards on your color wheel. All right, so I'm going to start bringing in a little bit of cool color. So for my palette, I'm going to go maybe with a cobalt here. And let's do cobalt here. So I had said that some of these reflected shadows on the table were tending towards a cool. So I'm going to use blue in these areas. I don't want it strong. I just want it very thin. So I've diluted my color quite a bit. You can see on my palette that I've added quite a bit of water. I'm not going in with strong color. It's very diluted, but it's going to make these areas cooler. So, and I don't have to be too fussy. Actually, I do want to keep a little bit of a highlight there, so I'm going to paint around that. But I'm going to come in and paint over some of these highlights that I said were going to be cooler. And the reason they're cooler is they're reflecting that cool white table. And I'm going to thin my paint. I'm thinning it and coming down the leg here, because I'm thinning it more because I definitely don't want to have blue legs. There's coolness, but I don't want them to be blue. And now that I'm painting on white paper, that could be a danger. So I am keeping those cool. The blaze. There's definitely some cool stuff happening here. I can go maybe a little darker there. There's some highlights around the eye and in the ear. And yep, I'm putting this over even the previous colors that I put down. I'm putting this on top, and what that's doing is it's cooling down that color that I put on top. So, or that color, cooling down the color underneath by putting it on top is what I meant to say. So, yeah, I could get a little bit more of that raw sienna down in this little area here, I think. Now that I've got some blues on there, I can see, okay, well, it could be a little warmer. So if I take a little bit of this raw sienna and I warm this up a bit, I can get that a little bit more like my photo. Right? Don't need to worry about the hoof because it's going to have a real dark on top. And how are we doing for time? Oh, we're almost an hour in. Okay, so let's pick up the pace here. There's a little bit of warmth on the blaze, but it's really pale, so I've really diluted this color. Okay, so I think I'm going to come in now. I'm going to just jump right in with my neutral tint, and I'm going to start with wetting all of this because I want the neutral tint to go on softly. I don't want it to have a cardboard cutout edge to it, you know, other than the edge of the horse against the background, but on the horse itself, I want to create form. So I need to make sure that I'm not creating an angle. Like if I put a hard edge, sometimes that can be translated as a sharp angle. So I want it to be soft. If you want to show a curve, you need to have that color with a soft edge. So I'm wetting this so that I can get those soft edges. So I'm wetting all of this, kind of working fast. And I'm going to go right through even the blue stuff that I did. I'm not going to worry about that right now because I don't mind if some of the darks find their way into there. I've got my separation of warm and cool now. So now I'm going to come in and start using darker color. I will blot my brush, so see how far it goes here. I want to test it in an area where, you know, if it bleeds too far, it won't be a critical area. And so like the tail is very dark, and so I could easily start here to see how far is that paint traveling. And I'm doing okay, I think. I've blotted my brush, so I'm able to control how far this paint is moving. You're going to have to stick around till the end when the masking fluid comes off, because that's when you really see the sparkle and you see the whole effect. So hang in there. Don't quit on me yet. So the best is yet to come. So with watercolor, you know, unlike other things, you know, like if you're working in oil or acrylic or something like that, you know that you can just pop those whites on at the end. but there's a little more suspense to watercolor because you have to hold off. You have to wait for things to dry. And just, you do also in other mediums as well, but it's especially important in watercolor. All right, so I'm going to start mixing some of my burnt sienna with my neutral tint to give me more of a chocolatey brown. You can see that that really kind of gives me more of a dark brown. So in some of these areas, like here, I can really start to darken these up. And as I said, I can go over even some of the blues that I did, and that will still look like a cooler area with a crisp edge. So I can come in and go over these. Went a little wonky with my shape there, so I just have to correct it. All right. Really dark, just the neutral tint. So I like to have on my palette, I like to have one area that I've got the pure color. This is pretty much burnt sienna here, and this is the neutral tint, and this is my sort of combination zone. If you want to give it a name, that's where I combine my colors to get different values and different shifts of that color. So right at the hoof, I can put in the dark there. I can put in the dark on this hoof. I'm kind of working on dry here, but this is an isolated place, like it's just a dark in that one spot. I'm going to use the combination here to kind of come down and cool the rest of the leg here. I'm going to rinse my brush and just use clean water on a blotted brush for the bottom part so that I have this transition from a dark color to a light color. I can come back into my neutral tint, and while this is still wet, I can come in and add some more darks. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to add some more darks in here while this is still wet. And that's going to give me even more shifts in value. Get this hoof a little darker maybe. All right, so coming down and really getting some extra darks in there. A little bit darker where the that muscle is there. Just rinsing my brush because I want to carry this over into this shadow, or into that reflection, I should say. And I can see my paper is starting to dry a little. So I'm just going to take my brush and tickle these edges so that they don't turn into a hard edge. You have to re-wet things in a minute, but I'm just going to work down these legs in the meantime. So the transparent color, the you know, I'm working with transparent color here, I can basically show what I've done underneath. This is like putting a veil over top. So I'm glazing over top of what I've already done. And that is giving me layers, and the layers are helping to develop and create more shape. Okay, so I'm going to use a little bit more. I can see that these areas up here, they're a little bit light yet, so I'm going to just come in with a little bit more burnt sienna, get a little bit more going on there. I'm going to use clean water in here. Right. Come down this leg. I want to go a little bit light on these white areas of the leg. They're not pure white. They're not as white as the table. And I'll put maybe a little more blue in there to make them look a little more gray. So I've actually got a combination of colors in there. So the combination of colors gives me a gray. And this leg, is going to come down and connects to the other one. Let's get this a little more transparent here. And that sock. They probably call it something other than a sock, but you know, it looks like this horse is wearing white socks on the front. So I'm just going to come in with a little bit more color here, get things a little bit darker. The colors underneath will show where it's warm and cool. So it's the building up of these layers that's giving me more of that sort of porcelain look. And as I work, you know, I'm and it's not really something I can illustrate very well on camera, but there's hitting it wet, and then there's hitting it damp, and then there's hitting it dry. All right, so you're not seeing with the camera the dryness of the paper, but you can always tell whether or not a line gets hard. If you get a crisp line, you know that your paper is drying. So that's the telltale sign that, you know, you need to stop. If you're trying to get soft lines, then you need to stop if that happens. If you need to, you just stop and let things dry, and then you'll continue on after it's dry. Just re-wet and then keep painting. So up here where I did wet it on the head, I did wet it, but I can put my hand on it and I can feel that it's dry. So I'm going to take some more water here, and I'm going to re-wet this area because I know that it, you know, in the time that I've taken to work on these other areas, I know that it's dry. So I don't want to push my luck and try to paint into here when it's partly dry. So I'm just going to re-wet, make sure. And I'm slowly building up these values. I really want to get that strong contrast between, you know, the dark darks and the light lights. That full value range is important. So I'm coming in here to re-wet things. I'm come right down to this leg, and I'm going to avoid the blaze because that's a pretty straight line there. I don't want that to be a soft line, so I'm keeping this part dry, this blaze on the front of the face, and there we go. And Yeah, so neutral tint can have a little bit of that burnt sienna in it, but I'm using mostly neutral tint here. And I'm going to come in where these real darks are along the top, because, oh gosh, you know, you get those darks in there, then this china will just sparkle. That's where you really get that strong sense of china, the glossiness of that finish and that sort of thing. One of the problems that I see a lot of people run into when they're painting china is that they're afraid to go with these dark values, you know, to push till they get these extra darks. And without them, you just don't get that same sense of china or the glossiness of its finish. So you need to make sure that you are fearless about your darks, and you come in and paint like you know what you're doing, even if you don't feel like it. Which it takes a little bit of courage, but no guts, no glory, right? You're gonna have to get a little brave at some point. Greatness never comes from being shy about these things, so you've got to learn to embrace your fears for what they are, just fears, and try, right? You just got to try. Do you find that in your own painting? Do you find that you're nervous by any chance? What do you do to overcome your fears? Or do you? Do you give in to them? It's been hard for me to give, like to just not give in to them. You know, it takes courage to paint in watercolor. All right, so the ear, I'm going to paint around this ear for a second, just so I don't lose the lines, but when it comes to this ear, I'm going to have to come in and paint some extra darks on top. So let me get this, I think they're called forelocks, or the main part of the mane that comes down in front is called the forelocks, I think. I don't know. You horse people will have to tell me. I know I get all these terms wrong. Just go with it, okay? Play along. All right, so just along the edge of this blaze, it's pretty dark. So I'm coming in there. I'm going to reinforce some of the darks around the... Oh, I'm going to go right through that ear. What the heck? I'm going to go through all of this. This is pretty dark down in this area, so I'm putting in my darks. But these are going to dry lighter again, and I'll be able to go one more level. And so I'm just going to come in with some of these darks and keep building. And I'm trying to keep that cheek area there where it's raised up is getting a little more light. It's a little bit lighter under the eye there, so I want to make sure that I'm not just painting a brown horse and just painting it all in brown. I need to think about highlights and paint around them. So I'm going to go one more dark after this. All right, it's already starting to look pretty defined, and it is only paper. You're right, Melody. It's only paper. You know, it's fun just to do this, and you have to get over your fears. I had to get over my fears when I was starting these live things. Okay, so you can look back at the beginning ones that I did. You can tell I was pretty nervous, right? But I started these because it gave me practice learning online when COVID started and all of this kind of stuff, because I knew that I was going to have to take my painting online. And if I didn't, I would have no income. So I needed to be able to suck it up, go on camera, and try to act natural, which it's easier now. It's a lot easier now, but I gotta tell you, at first it was not so easy, and I was pretty awkward. But just like watercolor, you just do what you gotta do. So I'm looking, where could it be a little darker? You know, I'm just coming in with a little bit more. Want that highlight on the back here to show up nicely, so I'm going to come in with a little bit more strong color here. Go. Keep that fairly light in there, but darker than it is. Okay, I think I just went a little too wet in there. Shiny things like glass, porcelain, silver, all of these shiny things. The one thing they have in common is high contrast. So you do need to get those extra darks. Oh, thank you so much, Anne. That's so nice. Yes, and you know, I have to say, I have learned far more from my own mistakes than I have from, you know, the successes I've had. Very often I've had a success. It's like, I have no idea how that happened. But if you make mistakes and can analyze it and look at it and go, I think this happened because of that, and then you try it again, is where you learn, right? So that's what you need to do. Is you just need to embrace those mistakes as learning. So I'm coming in now. This paint is getting drier because I want to get these darks extra dark. And so I'm coming in with drier brush. You can see this paint isn't a puddle so much as it is a little bit more, little less diluted, right? So it's not as watery or puddly. So I need to come in and really get some of these extra darks. And I'm looking at, for example, this ear. All right, so this ear has a bunch of little darks, and it's just sort of a weird geometric pattern. It doesn't look like an ear, but the way the light is hitting it is making all this geometric pattern. So that's what I'm painting. I'm just painting that. And if I paint upside down, sometimes I can almost get a better effect than when I'm painting right side up. Anybody ever tried that? And the reason that that's easier is because you stop looking at, oh, it's supposed to be an ear, and you start looking at where's that light and where's that dark and what shape is it. So you start looking at value and shape much more than you are trying to make an ear. So all I'm looking at is, where are those shapes? Are they light or are they dark? They're pretty dark, so I'm putting my paint on almost buttery consistency, shall we say. So it gets really dark in some of these places, and that's what I'm trying to get in here. The darkest I can possibly make this neutral tint, which looks kind of black, but it's a little bit of a purpley black. So neutral tint is really nice color. I like it. If you use black watercolor, anybody use black watercolor? It's really, it dries and it looks like, I don't know, it looks like it lost all its life. It has no richness to it at all. And so that's why I much prefer to use other things like neutral tint or Payne's Gray for my shadows. And I'm almost up underneath my demo here. So I much prefer to use neutral tint or Payne's Gray for some of my darks, or mix my darks. But if I use neutral tint or Payne's Gray, it makes it easy to get dark fast. Here I can show you what it looks like on a scrap here. So if you're not familiar with these two colors or what they look like, so this is neutral tint, and that's pretty strong. Let me get a good dose of it here. Okay, so that's neutral tint. Let me zoom in on this for you. That's going to dry anyway, but I'm going to zoom in on this. All right, I'll thin it out so you can see what it looks like. Now I will take Payne's Gray. And this is why I don't just use one. Right? I will, depending on what I'm trying to do, I will use either or. So this is Payne's Gray. And you can see how bluish the Payne's Gray is compared to the neutral tint. The neutral tint is looking a little bit warmer. It looks a little bit purple. But this definitely looks more blue, more towards a green. So even though they're both dark, and they both probably could be considered a cool, this one's a cool dark, this one's a warm dark. So so that's what I use. I like, in this case I had a brown horse, so I chose to use the neutral tint in keeping with the browns. So get all that out of my brush. And I'm just going to start putting a couple of eye details in here, and we can start wrapping this up. There is a little bit around the nose. I guess this is the mouth here. The nose is up a little higher. It almost looks like it has a little pink in it. It might have. I won't get too fussy though. So there's a little bit of eye detail here. I'm simply looking at, now these are painted on, so they look like a painted on eye. This is a porcelain object, so it's painted on. I think I need to make the back a little darker here. Whoops, just keep the shape as well as I can. But this paint is starting to dry, so I'm going to wet my brush and I'm going to soften that line. So I blotted my brush, wet it, blotted it, and now I'm just going to come up and tickle that edge, and that will soften that. There we go. All right, so a little bit more warm color here, and I'm going to paint the idea of a nostril. There is a little bit of a detail on there that looks like a nostril, and I see a little bit, oh, don't want to put my hand in paint, wet paint. A little bit of darkness just down this one little section, so just come in with that. Oh, hoofs. We need hoofs on the front, don't we? Okay, so let me get that neutral tint, and I will put just the hoofs in, and I will dry this quickly, remove the masking fluid, and that will be where we're going. So hang in there. Only a few minutes to go here, and we will have our finished result. I do have a few other videos. They're not all live videos. I do have a few other pre-recorded videos with some helpful tips on using masking fluid or stretching paper and things like that. I do hope to add a few more of those. And again, you know, if you have some suggestions of videos that you'd like me to do, I would be happy to get your suggestions, because I'm doing this for you guys. All right, and I'm going to put just a little more warmth just under this chin before I call it quits. Just a little bit more dark right under there. A little bit burnt sienna maybe right in there. Okay, stay with me. I'm going to dry this quickly. We'll remove masking and we'll see how I did. Okay, I will mute. Okay, so my wonder where I put my tool. Hang on one second. Okay, now I do, as I was drying, I did spot a couple of little areas that I think still need adjusting. And, you know, you could look at this 100 times and still find something, right? It's always that way. But what I'm going to do right now, though, just so we can get it wrapped up, is that I'm going to use this pickup rubber cement eraser to lift off my masking fluid. So gently remove it. Can't remember where I have it, but I have a few bits here and there. And this is where the sparkle in your where it comes from on this. And these I won't have to do anything with. That's the nice thing about painting china, is that often your highlights are just going to stay crisp and white. You can see that they're very crisp, so don't need to do too much there. Lots of little sparkles up here on the forehead, a few on the mane. One thing you shouldn't do, though, is and I'm sorry, I guess I'm shaking the table, but one thing you should not ever do is try to take masking fluid off on, like, before everything is 110% dry. Like, you want to make sure it's fully dry, because what happens is you will tear your paper, you will smear the paint into the area that you're trying to remove your masking, and it just won't end well for you, trust me. So make sure that it's 100% dry for the best result, and to avoid problems. I don't know if I had any there. You can always put your hand over it and feel the rubbery bits. That's where you may have missed a bit of masking. So I think I've got pretty much most of this. It does look pretty shiny. I think that has done it. I can see here on the front chest area I could come in with a few more little bits, maybe with raw sienna or burnt sienna. Let's get a little burnt sienna in here too. And I could put a few extra little details in here. Yeah, I could darken up around the mane here. There's kind of a spot. Now, if I do come back in to touch things up, I'm going to have to work around my highlights now because the masking's off. There's nothing to prevent the paint from going in those spots. But I can carefully work around them if I need to. They're easy to find now. All right, so a couple of little touch-ups, and I think I'm going to call this one done for today. So, again, thank you. Oh, thank you for joining me. If you weren't here, there really wouldn't be any point. I'd be talking to myself. So, oh, that's so nice. Thank you, Verna. Yeah. So, thank you very much. I will see you maybe next Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great week. See you next time.